Hey y'all, it's Angela and welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I've done this, so I'm actually feeling a little bit rusty, but I thought I would come back nice and easy with a wrap up for the month of July. To the almost 1,000 of you that are here, oh my goodness, that is so unbelievable to comprehend. Thank you so much for subscribing, and I appreciate every single one of you. This month, I really took it easy. I read 5 books. Don't even talk to me about my Goodreads goal right now. I think last time I checked, I was 20 books behind. So we're just a little stressed, a little bit of a mess, but we're gonna get through it. The first 3 books I'm gonna talk about were part of my last weekend reading vlog, so I'll have that linked in the cards. But the first book I'm gonna talk about is The Hole by Hye-Young. In this book, after being critically injured from a car crash and losing his wife, our main character Ogi is now completely dependent on his somewhat untrustworthy mother-in-law. This was a really random audiobook that I picked up, and it was kind of sold to me as like this very quiet horror book. It was really short as well. I like to think of it more as kind of like a quiet psychological suspense. There's not a ton of like thrill or like straight up horror, but it is very unsettling to read. This book is really just a story of not great people. I think all the characters in this book are extremely flawed, and you find that out in bits and pieces as their past is being revealed through the story. I personally like the way the story was told. I'm usually not a fan of like the whole past and present jump, which this book kind of does a lot of, but it's told in the way of like the main character Ogi is reflecting on the past and kind of these events that have led to the car accident, as well as to the position he's in with his mother-in-law right now. If you enjoy reading about family drama, this might also be a good pick for you. I gave this book 4 stars. The next book was Night Film by Marisha Pessl. In this book, an investigative journalist tries to discover the truth behind the mysterious death of the daughter of a legendary horror film director. This book has been on my TBR for forever, and it's a really fast-moving suspense thriller. The experience of reading it really reminded me of when I was reading The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The plot and the way the journalist puts together the pieces from the past worked really well, and I thought it was really well crafted. I also really liked the intrigue around this horror director, Stanislas Cordova. Reading about his horror films, because it actually goes into quite great detail about what each of his films were about and why they're kind of like cult classics and what makes them so grotesque. That was also extremely interesting. The biggest thing I didn't really like about this book was that the characters felt very rough and untouchable. So when the plot pacing was kind of like slowing down, the book felt extremely aimless. So there were several like kind of like stop points in the book where I felt no need to read on. It was just, it had lost that drive, that momentum. The last quarter of the book was also hella messy. It just kind of went everywhere. There was just this one point where the characters kind of like reach the final part of their plan and they're trying to execute it, and as soon as they get to that part, everything just is like a fever dream. It's so wacky. This book had a lot of great like zingers and kind of conclusions about the darker parts of human nature. Very quotable stuff, but it kind of felt like it was put in there just to be cool. I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I read was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. In this book, best friends Poppy and Alex have taken yearly vacations together for the past 10 years until 2 years ago, where something happens on one of their vacations that completely changes their relationship. They no longer talk. They haven't talked since that incident, and Poppy has been feeling quite aimless and just unhappy in her life. So when Alex's brother invites them both to his wedding, Poppy takes this as an opportunity to try to mend their friendship through a vacation. This is a friends to lovers romance that a lot of people have been raving about, especially since it's coming off of the high of Beach Read, which I definitely loved as well. That was such a great book. I like that there's some very complex character development through this book, as well as a very layered relationship. Like Poppy and Alex have 10 plus years of friendship between them. Like there's so much shared experiences and history and just like unresolved feelings that they have to work through, both kind of at an individual level as well as between the two of them, that this story, as it's kind of like, as their history is kind of being revealed bit by bit, you start piecing together their kind of lives together and how they've gotten to this present point. I do have to say I personally preferred Beach Read and reading about those characters just because Friends to Lovers isn't my favorite trope. It's actually one of my kind of least favorite tropes. I tend to avoid friends to lovers if I can, but I think that the struggles the characters face, as well as their personal development from start to end of the book, was so extremely well done and so interesting to see and read about. I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I read was Leave the World Behind by Rumaan. After a sudden blackout, 2 families are forced to stay together in a remote home with no connections to the outside world. This is a slow-built suspense with a strong commentary on race and class. The traditional horror aspect of this book comes from this blackout and, these strangers and their families having to live with each other with no way to call or contact the outside world to see what's going on. And I think that this part was left intentionally kind of vague or kind of mentioned in passing, because what's really scarier is that these strangers are forced to work together under this assumption that they don't really trust each other because of the prejudices that they hold based on what they know of the other family. I think this book is good if you enjoy character studies, like very in-depth looks into people's motivations and their every thoughts, kind of like almost at like a stream of consciousness kind of style. And it almost kind of reminds me of the way The Whole is written. So if you read The Whole and you haven't read this book, you might like it, and kind of vice versa. I gave this book 4 stars. And the final book I read was We Are the Ants by Shaun Hutchinson. For years, our main character Henry has been abducted by aliens, and on a recent abduction, they tell him that the world's going to end in about 100 days. And they also tell him that he has the power to stop it. So he has 100 days to decide if he wants to save the world. This book is a pretty hard-hitting YA with kind of light sci-fi themes, kind of a lot of like anecdotes about space. So if you enjoy light sci-fi, this will probably be an interesting one to check out. That being said, please check the content warnings specifically for this book. I'll have those linked in the doc in my description. This book tackles a lot of really sensitive topics. Like, I went into it not prepared enough, so please check those. As I was reading this book and kind of reflecting on my experience reading, I think that this is one of those books that's better suited to like the demographic that it's intended for only. There are those YA books that kind of like are more fluid in the audience that they appeal to. I think specifically for We Are the Ants, it's definitely like a very much, you will really like this book if you read it kind of teens, like high school, that kind of age, but if you read it afterwards, it might not hit as hard. To me, the characters come off very extreme about every event that happens to them, as I think is befitting of the kind of time in their lives that they're in. So I think it's definitely hard to not get bogged down by the characters' angst. For me personally, when I was reading this book. Ultimately, what I really enjoyed about this book was that it almost feels kind of slice of life. Like, yes, there is this bigger plot of the world ending and what Henry's going to do about it, but this book is really just kind of like a chapter out of Henry's life, a very impactful chapter, but it is just kind of like this little part of his life that he's describing. And I usually really enjoy slice of life, so I think when I reframed it like that in my mind, the appeal of this book definitely kind of increased for me. So those are all the books that I read in July. Short list. Hopefully August will have a bit of a better turnout. Thanks for watching my wrap up. If you want to see more book content from me, I have my Instagram, Goodreads, as well as Storygraph linked in the description. Please add me on those. I would love to be friends with all of you on there. If you like this video, please click like, and if you want to see more, click subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.